The Johnson family was like any other in their quiet town. Mark, a 45-year-old hard-working father, had always believed that parenting was more than just providing for his children. It was about preparing them for the real world. His wife, Sarah, a kind and nurturing woman, had always supported his ideas, trusting his wisdom in raising their two children, 12-year-old Jake and 9-year-old Lily. Though Jake and Lily were bright kids, Mark often worried that they were growing up without understanding some of the most important life lessons that couldn't be taught in school. They had everything they needed: a comfortable home, good food, and modern gadgets. But Mark feared they didn't fully appreciate these blessings. One evening at the dinner table, Mark set down his fork and cleared his throat. "I've been thinking," he began, catching the attention of his family. "We need to take a trip." Sarah looked up with a curious smile. "A trip? Where to?" Mark smirked. "That's a surprise. But there's one rule: no phones, no tablets, just us and nature." Jake, who had been mid-bite, nearly dropped his fork. "Wait, what? No internet?" Lily gasped dramatically. "You mean we have to survive without YouTube?" Mark chuckled. "Yes, exactly. This trip isn't just for units for learning. I want to teach you both some important lessons about life." Sarah, always the supportive partner, nodded. "I think it's a great idea. It'll be an adventure." Jake and Lily exchanged uncertain glances. The idea of leaving their comfortable home for an unknown trip without their favorite devices felt unsettling. Despite their reluctance, the next morning, they packed their bags with essentials. Mark reminded them, only necessities, no electronics. The drive started normally, with music playing softly in the background as the scenery changed from urban streets to country roads. Jake and Lily kept asking where they were going, but Mark only responded with a knowing smile. Then, after nearly 2 hours of driving, Mark suddenly turned onto a narrow dirt road, leading into a dense forest. The bumpy ride made Lily giggle while Jake clutched his seat, slightly nervous. Dad? Are we lost?" Jake asked, staring at the tall trees surrounding them. Mark shook his head. "Nope, we're right where we need to be." Finally, they stopped in front of a small wooden cabin by a lake, surrounded by trees. It was simple: no electricity, no Wi-Fi, just nature. Lily's eyes widened. "Are we staying here?" Mark grinned. "Yep, welcome to our weekend home." Jake frowned. "You mean we're living like pioneers?" Sarah chuckled. "Not exactly, but close." As they stepped out of the car, Mark stretched and said, "Lesson number 1, adaptability. In life, things won't always go as planned. Sometimes, you'll find yourself in unfamiliar places. The key is learning to adjust." Lily looked around. "So, what do we do now?" Mark pointed to a pile of wooden logs nearby. "You and Jake will build a shelter without my help." Jake's jaw dropped. "What? We don't know how to build anything." Mark smiled. "That's the point. Life won't always hand you a blueprint. You have to figure things out." Lily, always the more enthusiastic sibling, immediately started gathering sticks. Jake, though hesitant, followed her lead. Over the next hour, they struggled, failed, and tried again. Their shelter wasn't perfect, it leaned awkwardly, and some branches fell, but it stood. Mark clapped his hands. "Good job. You figured it out." As the sun began to set, Sarah prepared a simple meal, and the family sat by a small campfire. The warm glow illuminated their faces as they shared stories and laughter. And just like that, the first lesson was learned, not through books, but through experience. The night in the forest was unlike anything Jake and Lily had ever experienced. There was no glow of a television screen, no buzzing of phone notifications, just the sound of crickets and the rustling leaves in the cool night breeze. Jake tossed and turned in his sleeping bag. The ground was uneven, and he could hear the occasional distant howl of an animal. Lily, curled up beside Sarah, seemed more at ease, but Jake felt uneasy. "Dad?" Jake whispered. Mark, lying near the fire with his hands behind his head, replied, "Yes, son? I don't think I can sleep out here." "What if there are wolves?" Mark chuckled softly. "Jake, we're safe. But this is another lesson learning to be comfortable outside of your comfort zone. If you only live in ease, you'll never grow." Jake sighed. It wasn't the answer he was hoping for, but he knew his dad wasn't going to give in. Eventually, fatigue took over, and both Jake and Lily drifted into sleep. The next morning, the golden rays of the sun filtered through the towering trees, casting a warm glow over the campsite. Birds chirped, and the lake shimmered in the morning light. Lily woke up stretching and yawning. "That was the best sleep ever," she chirped. Jake sat up, rubbing his eyes. "I feel like I slept on a pile of bricks." Sarah laughed as she unpacked a small cooking pot. "Well, today is a new day, and you both have work to do." Mark clapped his hands together. Lesson number 2, hard work and gratitude. Today, you're going to experience what it takes to make a meal from scratch. Lily tilted her head. "You mean we have to cook? But we don't even have a kitchen." Mark grinned. "Exactly. You see, at home, food is easy to get. Open the fridge and there's milk. Press a few buttons, and the microwave heats your meal. But here, things work differently." Jake groaned. "So, what do we have to do?" Mark handed them a small fishing net and pointed at the lake. "You'll be catching our breakfast." Lily's eyes widened. "Fishing? That sounds fun." Jake, however, wasn't as thrilled. "I've never caught a fish before." "Then today's the perfect day to learn," Mark said with a wink. Armed with the net, Jake and Lily waded into the shallow part of the lake. The water was cold, and small fish darted beneath the surface. Lily tried to scoop one up with the net, but the fish slipped right through. "They're too fast," she complained. Jake, determined not to go hungry, crouched and tried a different technique, waiting patiently. After several attempts, he finally caught a small fish. "I got one," he shouted triumphantly. Lily clapped. "Good job, Jake." Mark, watching from the shore, nodded approvingly. "See? Hard work pays off." Once they had caught enough, they returned to the camp. Mark showed them how to clean the fish and cook it over an open flame. As they ate, Jake took a bite and paused. "This tastes different." Sarah smiled. "That's because you worked for it." Mark leaned forward. "Lesson learned?" Jake nodded. "Yeah. Food isn't just something that appears. It takes effort." Lily beamed. "I think this is the best breakfast I've ever had." After breakfast, Mark led them on a short hike up a hill overlooking the valley. The view was breathtaking: rolling green fields, a sparkling river, and birds soaring in the sky. Mark sat down on a rock and gestured for his family to join him. "This brings me to another important lesson: gratitude." Jake and Lily listened attentively. "Many people go through life focusing on what they don't have," Mark continued. "They wish for more money, better gadgets, or a bigger house. But the truth is, the happiest people aren't those with the most. They're the ones who appreciate what they already have." Lily thought for a moment. "Like how we always take food for granted?" Mark nodded. "Exactly, and not just food or home. Our family, the people who love us. Sometimes, we don't realize how lucky we are." Jake looked out at the valley. "I never really thought about it like that. I guess I should be more thankful for what we have." Sarah hugged him. "That's a wonderful realization, Jake." Mark stood up. "Now, let's head back. The day is far from over, and there are more lessons to learn." As they made their way down the hill, Jake and Lily felt something change within them. They had come on this trip reluctantly, but now they were beginning to see it differently. This wasn't just a trip, it was a journey of discovery. The sun was now high in the sky, casting golden beams over the dense forest. The family had returned from their morning hike, feeling energized and enlightened by the lessons they had learned so far. However, Mark had more planned for the day. As they reached their campsite, Mark turned to Jake and Lily with a mysterious smile. "All right, kids. It's time for your next challenge learning about courage and problem solving," he said, crossing his arms. Lily tilted her head. "How are we going to learn that?" Jake sighed, still feeling full from breakfast. "Is it going to be another test?" Mark chuckled. "Sort of. But this time, we're going on a little adventure." After a brief rest, Mark led the family deeper into the forest. The towering trees created a natural canopy, filtering the sunlight into dancing patterns on the ground. Birds chirped above, and the occasional rustling in the bushes hinted at small forest creatures moving about. Sarah carried a small backpack with water bottles, while the kids walked eagerly behind their father. After about 20 minutes, they reached a clearing where a rickety wooden bridge stretched over a small but rushing river. Mark pointed to the bridge. "This is our next lesson." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Are we supposed to cross that thing?" Lily gasped. "It looks like it could fall apart at any moment." Mark smiled. "Exactly. This is where courage comes in. Sometimes in life, we face challenges that seem risky or uncertain. We can either stand frozen by fear or find a way to move forward." Jake took a step closer to the bridge and inspected it. Some of the wooden planks looked weak, and the rope holding it up seemed old. He felt his stomach tighten. "But what if it breaks?" he asked. Mark nodded. "That's where problem solving comes in. You have to assess the situation, think logically, and make a plan." Sarah knelt next to Lily, reassuring her. "Remember, courage isn't about being fearless. It's about facing your fears and moving forward despite them." Lily gulped, but nodded. Mark took the lead, stepping onto the bridge first. He moved cautiously, testing each plank before placing his full weight on it. Once he reached the other side, he waved at them. "It's stable enough if you step carefully." Sarah followed next, gripping the ropes tightly as she made her way across. Jake turned to Lily. "You can hold my hand if you want." Lily hesitated for a moment, but then took Jake's hand. Together they carefully stepped onto the bridge. The wooden planks creaked beneath them, and the river below rushed loudly, but they kept moving. Halfway across, a gust of wind made the bridge sway slightly. Lily yelped, gripping Jake's arm. Jake took a deep breath. "It's okay. Just don't look down. We're almost there." Slowly, they continued forward until they finally reached the other side. As soon as their feet touched solid ground, Lily let out a relieved sigh. "That was scary." Mark ruffled her hair. "And yet, you did it." Jake smiled. "I guess it wasn't as bad as I thought." Mark clapped his hands. "Exactly. That's the lesson. Courage and problem solving go hand in hand. In life, you'll face situations where you feel afraid, but if you take a step back, assess the problem, and move forward carefully, you'll overcome anything." Lily beamed. "I think I understand now." Sarah nodded. "You both showed bravery today." Mark took a sip of water from his bottle. "Now let's keep going. There's still more to learn." As they walked deeper into the forest, they stumbled upon an old abandoned cabin. The wooden walls were covered in moss, and the windows were broken. Jake peered inside. "What is this place?" Mark sighed. "It looks like an old ranger station. People probably used it a long time ago." Suddenly, they heard a faint whimpering sound. Lily's eyes widened. "Did you hear that?" They all went silent and listened. The sound came again, a soft, pained whimper coming from inside the cabin. Without hesitation, Jake pushed the door open, and inside, they found a small dog curled up in the corner. Its fur was dirty, and its paw looked injured. "Oh no!" Lily cried, rushing to its side. Sarah examined the dog carefully. It must have gotten hurt and found shelter here. Mark took off his jacket and gently wrapped it around the dog. This is another important lesson helping others, whether it's people or animals. When you see someone in need, you should always try to help. Jake looked at the dog, feeling a sense of responsibility. "Can we take him back with us?" Mark nodded. "Of course, but first we need to clean his wound and make sure he's okay." Lily smiled softly. "I think he was waiting for someone to find him." Sarah stroked the dog's fur, "And he's lucky we did." As they prepared to head back to their campsite, Jake felt something new inside him, a sense of fulfillment. It wasn't just about learning life lessons anymore. It was about applying them in real situations. Helping the dog wasn't something they had planned, it was something they chose to do because it was the right thing. Mark patted Jake's shoulder. "Proud of you, son." Jake grinned. "Thanks, Dad." As they walked back, carrying the rescued dog in their arms, the forest seemed brighter, and their hearts felt lighter. Today, they hadn't just learned about courage, they had lived it. With the small injured dog wrapped in Mark's jacket, the family made their way back toward the campsite. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm glow over the towering trees. The sounds of chirping birds slowly faded, replaced by the distant hooting of an owl. The adventure had taken an unexpected turn, but the lessons were far from over. Lily cradled the dog gently. "I think we should name him Lucky," she suggested, looking up at her parents. Sarah smiled. "That's a beautiful name. He's lucky we found him, and we're lucky to help him." Mark led the way, his mind filled with pride for his children. They were learning life's most valuable lessons, not through lectures, but through real experiences. That's what he had hoped for when they set out on this trip. As they approached their campsite, Mark suddenly stopped. His eyes scanned the ground ahead. The river they had crossed earlier now looked different. The water level had risen slightly due to the recent rainfall in the mountains. The wooden bridge they had carefully crossed was no longer safe. Some of the planks had broken apart, and the current underneath rushed even stronger than before. Jake noticed it too. "Uh-oh, how are we going to get across now?" Lily's eyes widened. "We can't leave Lucky behind. He still needs help." Sarah frowned, looking at the river. "We can't risk crossing that bridge anymore." Mark took a deep breath. This was another perfect moment to teach them a lesson: teamwork and perseverance. "All right, team," he said, turning to his family. "This is our next challenge. We have to figure out a way to get across safely, together." Jake looked around. "Maybe we can find another bridge?" Mark nodded. "That's a good idea. Let's split up and search for a safe way across. Stay within shouting distance." The family scattered within a small radius, carefully searching for another route. Lily called out first. "Dad, there are some large rocks in the water over here. Maybe we can step on them to cross." Mark walked over and inspected the rocks. They were large enough to hold weight, but the water rushing over them made them slippery. "It's risky," he said. "If someone loses their balance, they could fall in." Jake suddenly pointed to a fallen tree nearby. "What about that log? If we push it into the water, we could use it as a bridge." Mark's eyes lit up. "Now that's thinking outside the box. Let's give it a try." The entire family worked together to roll the large log toward the river. It wasn't easy, the log was heavy, and the uneven ground made it even more difficult to move. Lily wiped her forehead. "This is harder than I thought." Sarah smiled. "But we're doing it together, and that's what matters." Jake and Mark pushed with all their strength, and with a final effort, the log rolled into the river, resting against the rocks on both sides. Mark tested it first, stepping carefully. The log wobbled slightly, but it was sturdy enough. "All right," he said. We'll go one at a time. I'll go first, then Sarah, Jake, and Lily. You'll carry Lucky across last. One by one, they carefully crossed the log. Jake took slow, steady steps, making sure not to slip. When he reached the other side, he cheered. "We did it!" Lily stepped onto the log last, holding Lucky close. The little dog whimpered slightly, sensing the height above the rushing water. "You're okay, Lucky," Lily whispered, as she carefully balanced her steps. Mark held out his hands on the other side. "Just a few more steps, sweetheart." With one last careful step, Lily made it across. The family erupted into cheers. They had done it together. Once they caught their breath, Mark turned to his kids with a proud smile. That was a perfect example of teamwork. Alone, none of us could have moved that log or crossed safely, but together, we found a way. Jake grinned. "I guess when we work as a team, anything is possible." Sarah nodded. "And perseverance. If we had given up, we'd still be stuck on the other side." Lily hugged Lucky, and now Lucky can get the help he needs. Mark ruffled her hair. "That's right. You see, life will always throw challenges at you. You might feel stuck, lost, or afraid, but if you keep trying and work together with those around you, you'll always find a way forward." Jake and Lily exchanged a glance. They had faced fears, learned courage, helped someone in need, and now they had conquered a challenge as a team. Mark looked up at the sky. The sun was beginning to set, painting the horizon in shades of orange and pink. Their journey was coming to an end, but the lessons they had learned would last a lifetime. "Come on," Mark said. "Let's head back to camp and take care of our new friend." As they walked together, their bond as a family felt stronger than ever. As the family made their way back to their campsite, the sky darkened into a deep shade of blue, speckled with the first twinkling stars of the night. The air was crisp, carrying the soft rustling of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. Though tired, each member of the family felt an overwhelming sense of accomplishment. They had faced challenges, learned lessons, and above all, strengthened their bond. Lily gently stroked Lucky's fur as she carried him. The small dog had relaxed in her arms, trusting his new family completely. Jake let out a deep sigh. "That was the most intense trip I've ever been on," Mark chuckled. "And what did you learn from it?" Jake didn't hesitate. "That fear is just in our heads. When I faced the height of the cliff, I realized it wasn't as bad as I thought. Sometimes, you just have to push yourself past fear to see the truth." Lily grinned. "And I learned that kindness doesn't need a reason. Helping Lucky felt good, just because it was the right thing to do." Sarah smiled proudly at her children. "And teamwork got us across that river. No one could have done it alone." Mark nodded in approval. "You both have learned some of life's most valuable lessons: courage, kindness, and perseverance. But there's one more lesson I want to share before we go home. The importance of family." The family gathered around the campfire one last time. The flickering flames cast warm shadows on their faces as they roasted marshmallows and enjoyed the quiet peace of nature. Mark leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. "Throughout this trip, we faced obstacles, fears, and challenges, but there's one thing that remained constant to our family. No matter what happened, we had each other." Jake and Lily exchanged glances, realizing the truth in their father's words. "In life," Mark continued, "there will be times when things get tough. You might feel lost, scared, or even alone, but family is always there to support you, guide you, and remind you that you're never truly alone." Lily hugged Lucky tightly. "Just like how we helped Lucky." "Exactly," Sarah said, wrapping an arm around her daughter. "Family doesn't always mean just the people you're related to. Sometimes it's the people or even the animals who stand by you no matter what." Jake nodded slowly. "I guess I never really thought about it that way. I always took our family for granted." Mark smiled. "And that's okay. But never forget love, trust, and support are what make a family strong. No matter where life takes you, always remember that you belong to a family that will always have your back. Lily yawned, snuggling against her mother. I like our family, she murmured sleepily. And I think Lucky does too. The small dog wagged his tail, curling up beside her. Jake stretched and stood up. All right, I think I'm ready to go home. I have a lot to think about. Mark clapped his hands. Then let's pack up. We have a long journey ahead. The next morning, they packed up their belongings, making sure to leave their campsite as clean as they had found it. Before leaving, Lily placed a small rock on a nearby tree stump and whispered, "Thank you for the memories." As they drove back toward town, Lucky sat happily in Lily's lap, looking out the window with his ears perked up. His days of being lost and abandoned were over. He had found a family that truly cared for him. When they finally reached home, Lucky was introduced to his new homie, a cozy corner of the living room with a soft blanket and a bowl of food. He wagged his tail excitedly, as if understanding that he had found where he truly belonged. Jake turned to his father. "You know, I think this trip was the best thing we've ever done." Mark smiled. "And why is that?" "Because I realized that life isn't just about getting through each day. It's about growing, learning, and being with the people who matter." Sarah beamed with pride. "That's a lesson that will stay with you forever." Lily giggled. "And also, always help a dog in need." The family laughed, and for the first time in a long while, there was a deeper understanding between them, a bond that had been strengthened through adventure, challenge, and love. As the sun set on their home, Lucky curled up beside them, his small tail wagging in happiness. He too had learned an important lesson sometimes. The greatest journeys lead you right where you were meant to be.